Dad's home.
Dad's home!
The Kaelith Dominion fleet dropped out of warp at the edge of the Sol system, in a formation so precise it looked less like a war fleet, and more like a geometric proof. 50 dreadnoughts arranged in 5 concentric rings of 10, each vessel 3 kilometers of dull violet armor plating, each one bristling with graviton lances and plasma broadsides that had cracked open 40 worlds without ever needing a second volley. At the center of the formation, twice the size of any ship around it, floated the Dominion flagship, the Reclamation's voice, its hull etched with the sigils of 40 conquered species, each glyph a grave marker for a civilization that had once believed itself capable of saying no. High Marshal Vextarian Krull stood on the command deck of the Reclamation's voice, with his 4 subordinate arms folded behind his back, and his primary pair clasped in front of him in the traditional posture of Dominion authority, the posture that said, "I am already bored by your resistance before you have even offered any." His compound eyes, faceted and the color of dried blood, tracked the sensor plot as it resolved the sparse, scattered signature of human infrastructure across the system: 3 shipyards, a scattering of orbital habitats, a handful of colony domes on Mars and Europa that together represented, by Dominion metrics, approximately 1/400th of the industrial capacity of a single one of his dreadnoughts. "Pathetic," Krull said, and his translator drone rendered the word in flat, a motionless Terran standard for the benefit of the recording. 41 species we have processed. 41. And every single one of them in the final moment believed themselves special, believed themselves the exception. Communications Officer Thess, open a channel to the primary human settlement. Let us begin the formality. Thess, a smaller Kaelith with iridescent chitin and nervous antennae, bent over her console. Channel open, High Marshal. Transmitting on all human diplomatic frequencies, all known languages repeating. Good. Krull straightened, allowing his voice to take on the resonant, practiced cadence he used for first contact, a cadence refined over 4 decades and 41 worlds. Attention, inhabitants of the system designated Sol. I am High Marshal Vextarian Krull, Supreme Commander of the 3rd Reclamation Fleet of the Kaelith Dominion. You are hereby ordered to cease all independent industrial and military activity. Your colonies beyond your homeworld are claimed as Dominion territory, effective immediately. Your species will submit a delegation of surrender within 1 solar hour, or this fleet will begin the systematic dismantlement of your infrastructure, starting with your orbital shipyards and proceeding to your surface population centers. Resistance has never once succeeded against Dominion forces. It will not succeed today. You have 1 hour. He closed the channel with a flick of one secondary arm and turned to his tactical officer, a broad-shouldered Kaelith named Dross who had served with him since the conquest of the Verathi cluster. Odds they attempt a defense fleet, Dross. Their military signatures suggest nothing capable of engaging us directly, High Marshal. Some system defense platforms, a handful of destroyer-class vessels, nothing above 40,000 tons displacement. If they resist, it will be a formality. We will lose no ships. As it should be. Krull allowed himself something almost like satisfaction. Species this young are always the easiest. No scar tissue yet. No memory of what real war costs. They still believe their little wars against each other prepared them for something like us. He turned and paced the length of the command deck, 4 decades of habit carrying him past the rows of subordinate officers who kept their eyes carefully forward, the particular discipline of a crew who had learned long ago that their commander's pre-battle monologues were a performance meant less for the enemy than for his own crew's morale, a ritual as fixed as any Dominion war hymn. Do you know, Dross, what I find most tedious about this particular ritual? It is not the fighting. The fighting, when it comes, is always brief. It is the waiting, the hour we grant them, out of what High Command insists on calling procedural mercy, though we both know it is closer to theater, a chance for the frightened to compose themselves into whatever dignity they can manage before the inevitable. A mercy nonetheless, High Marshal, Dross offered, in the careful tone of an officer who had learned exactly how much agreement his commander required at moments like this. The Osk Collective wept with gratitude for that hour, if I recall the reports. The Osk Collective wept regardless of what we gave them. Weeping is what young species do. Krull stopped at the edge of the observation dome, gazing out at the pale, distant disk of a star the Kaelith database listed simply as G-type yellow, Sol. Third Reclamation Target 42, a designation that would within the hour be updated to reclaimed, a formality repeated 41 times before with the mechanical certainty of a species that had genuinely forgotten what it felt like to lose. Thes. Anything from the surface yet. Panic broadcasts, evacuation chatter, the usual pleading. Thes's antennae twitched as she scanned incoming frequencies. Remarkably little, High Marshal. Their public communication networks show continuity, ordinary broadcasts, commercial transmissions, no evacuation orders, no military mobilization visible on any channel we're monitoring. Dross frowned, an expression that translated across species more or less intact. That is unusual. Even the Varathi, who had some warning of our approach through refugee networks, showed signs of panic within minutes of fleet detection. This species detected us. Our sensors confirm passive scans from 3 of their orbital platforms, and yet their surface population appears to be going about an ordinary day. Either extraordinary discipline, Krull said, or extraordinary ignorance. I confess I would put my wagers on the latter. Species this young rarely grasp the scale of what approaches until the moment it is directly overhead. Let them enjoy their ignorance a little longer. It will make the hour's expiration all the more instructive. He returned to his command chair and settled into it with the unhurried comfort of a man who had performed this exact sequence of motions 41 times before and expected the 42nd to unfold identically. Time remaining on the ultimatum. 19 minutes, High Marshal, Thes reported. The minutes passed the way they always passed on the bridge of the reclamation's voice before a reclamation, in a kind of ceremonial quiet, officers running final diagnostic checks on weapon, arrays that both sides of the exchange already knew would not be seriously contested. Junior crew exchanging the small, private glances of a species long accustomed to watching history repeat itself, and finding no particular thrill in it anymore. Dross ran through the fleet's tactical readiness a final time, more out of habit than necessity, confirming shield harmonics, confirming weapon charge across all 5 rings, confirming that the boarding shuttles standing ready in the Reclamation's Voice's launch bays carried sufficient marine complements to secure whatever token resistance the human military might, against all historical precedent, attempt to mount. All ships report full readiness, High Marshal, Dross said when the count reached 0. Ultimatum window has expired. No surrender delegation has been received. Then we proceed as always. Krull's voice carried the flat, practiced weight of a man about to speak words he had spoken 41 times before, words that had, on every previous occasion, marked the beginning of the end for whoever heard them. Helm, bring the fleet to attack posture. Ring 1, prepare to advance on the primary human shipyard. Ring 2, stand ready to. 41 minutes into the hour, something happened that had never happened in the 4 decades of the Third Reclamation Fleet's existence. Something that would be studied, argued over, and eventually mythologized across 100 worlds for the rest of Dominion history. Space tore. It did not tear the way a warp transition normally tore. A clean lens flare bloom of exotic radiation that every sensor operator in the fleet had seen 10,000 times. This tear was violent, a shuddering wound in the fabric of the local vacuum that made every gravimetric sensor on all 50 Dreadnoughts scream simultaneously. And out of that wound, directly into the dead center of the Dominion's perfect 5-ring formation, close enough that its hull nearly clipped two Kaelith cruisers on the inner ring, dropped a single ship. It was enormous. Later, Dominion engineers would argue for years about the exact figure, but initial sensor sweeps placed it at 9 kilometers stem to stern, 3 times the length of the Reclamation's voice itself. A long, dark, angular hull the color of a starless night, its surface unmarked by any insignia, any flag, any of the decorative sigils that every Dominion ship carried as a matter of martial pride. It simply was. Immense, silent, and utterly, contemptuously alone. High Marshal, Dross's voice cracked, actually cracked, something Krull had never heard from him in 11 years of service. High Marshal, that vessel is inside our formation. It is inside our formation. Sensors show no drive signature, no shield harmonic we recognize, no. By the first hive, its hull scan won't resolve. We cannot get a mass reading. The gravimetric interference is. Report to your station, Krull snapped, though he could feel something cold uncoiling in the space between his 4 hearts, a sensation he had not felt in decades and did not have a name for anymore. It is one ship, Dross. We have 50, hail it now. Aboard the human ship, in a command bridge lit by soft blue instrument light, and populated by a crew of perhaps 40 men and women who looked, by any objective measure, entirely too relaxed for a vessel that had just materialized in the crosshairs of an alien battle fleet. Captain Elena Voss sat in her command chair with one leg crossed over the other, sipping from a mug of coffee that had gone slightly cold during the jump, and watched the tactical plot bloom red around her with 50 hostile contacts. Well, she said, to no one in particular, that's a lot of them. Her executive officer, a broad, gray-bearded man named Commander Rourke who had flown gunships in 3 different wars before this one, glanced up from his own console with the flat expression of a man who had seen this exact scenario play out in simulation 40 times and had bet real money on the outcome each time. 50 Dreadnoughts, Captain. Concentric ring formation. Decent tactical instinct, honestly. Whoever designed that deployment pattern actually understands crossfire geometry. Shame it's about to be useless. Voss set down her coffee. Shields. Ganymede pattern adaptive lattice, full charge, holding at 100%. For reference, Captain, current Dominion weapon signatures we're reading off their targeting arrays are rated to punch through roughly 2 meters of titanium composite armor per hit. Our shields are rated to no-sell a small moon. I know the specs, Rourke. I signed off on the specs. Voss allowed herself a small smile. I'm asking because I like hearing you say it. They're hailing us, Captain, said the young comms officer, Ensign Tavers, from her station near the front of the bridge, her voice carrying the particular tightness of someone experiencing her first real first-contact scenario and doing an admirable job of not showing it. High Marshal Vextarian Krull, Kaelith Dominion 3rd Reclamation Fleet. He's not happy, Captain. He's about to be a lot less happy. Put him on main viewer. The screen resolved into the image of Krull, his 4 arms and faceted crimson eyes filling the display, his mandibles working in what the ship's xenolinguistics database, drawing on decades of intercepted Dominion transmissions, gathered by deep-cover listening posts humanity had quietly seeded through 3 sectors over the past 20 years, flagged as an expression of aggressive incredulity. Unidentified vessel, Krull said, his translated voice booming through the bridge speakers with theatrical menace. You have violated Dominion formation space and interrupted a sovereign diplomatic proceeding. Identify yourself immediately and prepare to be boarded for inspection or face immediate destruction. Voss uncrossed her legs, stood, and walked forward to stand directly beneath the main viewer, hands clasped loosely behind her back, the posture of a woman who had absolutely nowhere else she needed to be. I Marshal Krull, she said, and something in her tone made even Rourke, who had heard her give this speech in rehearsal a dozen times, feel a small chill run down his spine. My name is Captain Elena Voss, and this is the S. Prometheus's fist, first, and as of this exact moment only vessel of her class currently in active service. On behalf of the sovereign nations of Earth, I am formally rescinding your 1-hour ultimatum. Consider it withdrawn, unsubmitted, politely and enthusiastically declined. Krull's mandibles stilled. On his own bridge, Dross had gone very quiet, his antennae flat against his skull, an unmistakable Kaelith stress posture that his translator did not bother rendering because there was no polite way to say your commander is about to say something monumentally stupid. "You dare," Krull said, "issue terms to me. One ship. One primitive ship against the third reclamation fleet of the Kaelith Dominion, conquerors of 41 worlds. Do you understand what you are looking at, Captain Voss? Do your sensors even register what surrounds you?" "Oh, I understand exactly what surrounds me." Voss's smile didn't waver. 50 dreadnoughts. Very impressive formation, by the way. Whoever taught your fleet captains ring geometry knew what they were doing. I'm sure it's worked beautifully on the last 41 species you rolled up on. Bronze Age fleets, most of them, if the reports we've gathered are accurate. Species who'd never fought a war against anything that could fight back on equal footing. Species who looked at 50 of your ships and saw the entire concept of hope collapse in real time. And you believe yourselves different. Krull's voice carried genuine, almost scholarly curiosity now, the tone of a man examining an insect that had, against all expectation, begun speaking Latin. "Explain to me, Captain, what makes one human vessel different from 41 dead civilizations?" "Happy to." Voss began to pace slow, unhurried steps across the bridge, and every human on that bridge recognized the rhythm of a speech that had been written, rewritten, and rehearsed specifically for this moment, because Earth strategists had known this day was coming for 20 years and had planned every syllable of it. "See, here's the thing about humanity, High Marshal. We've never had the luxury of an easy war. Every single conflict in our history, we fought against ourselves, and we are exceptionally, catastrophically good at hurting our own kind. Millennia of it. We optimized violence the way your Dominion optimized conquest, except our test subjects were each other, which meant every trick, every weapon, every tactic had a countermeasure developed within a generation, because the enemy was never some primitive species 3 centuries behind us in technology. The enemy was always us, just as clever, just as motivated, just as willing to do whatever it took to win." "A charming narrative for propaganda purposes," Krull said, though the stillness in his 4 hearts suggested he did not find it charming at all. "It does not change the numbers in front of you." "You're right, it doesn't, so let me change the numbers instead." Voss stopped pacing and looked directly into the camera. 22 years ago, High Marshal, a listening post we'd quietly seated in the Varathi cluster picked up your fleet's communications during the conquest of the Osk Collective. We watched you do it. We watched every ship, every weapon signature, every shield harmonic, every tactical doctrine your Dominion has used across 41 campaigns. And then we went home, and we spent 2 decades building something specifically, deliberately, with malicious forethought, to make sure that when you eventually found us, and we always knew you would, the 42nd name on your list would be the last one. The bridge of the Reclamation's voice had gone entirely silent except for the low hum of instrumentation. Dross had not moved. Even Thess at the comms station had stopped the nervous twitching of her antennae, frozen in something between disbelief and dawning, ice-cold understanding. "You are bluffing," Krull said, but the certainty had drained from his voice, replaced by something that, translated into any language in the galaxy, would still sound exactly like doubt. "Am I?" Voss glanced sideways just once toward Rourke, a small private signal the cameras didn't need to catch. "Tell you what, High Marshal, since you seem like a numbers man, let's do a demonstration. Have your fleet fire on my ship, all 50 vessels. Full alpha strike, everything you've got right now, no warning shots, no probing fire, just everything all at once. Consider it a professional courtesy. I want your gunnery officers to understand precisely what they're dealing with before this goes any further, because frankly, High Marshal, I'd rather not have to explain it to you twice." For a long moment, Krull said nothing. Then his mandibles clicked together in a sound his translator rendered roughly as a bitter approximation of a laugh. "You want us to fire on you." The Dominion commander's four arms unfolded from behind his back, gesturing at the tactical plot surrounding his flagship, 50 dreadnoughts arrayed in perfect killing geometry around a single human ship. "Captain Voss, I have conquered species who begged on their knees, in whatever configuration their anatomy allowed for kneeling, for the mercy of a quick death rather than face what 50 Dominion dreadnoughts can do in a single volley. You are asking for it." "I'm asking politely," Voss said. "Consider it my last act of diplomacy for the day." Krull turned from the screen and addressed his tactical officer, his voice hard and cold now. All trace of theatrical menace burned away and replaced by something far more dangerous. An old and practiced killer who had simply decided the conversation was over. "Dross, all ships full Alpha strike. Graviton lances, plasma broadsides, everything. Target the human vessel, fire on my mark." "All ships acknowledge, High Marshal. Weapons charged. Firing solutions locked across all 50 vessels." "Fire." What happened next would be recorded by every sensor suite in the Dominion fleet, replayed and analyzed for the rest of the war by tactical officers who, in many cases, simply refused to believe what their own instruments had captured. 50 dreadnoughts fired simultaneously. 211 graviton lances lanced across the black in beams of collapsing spacetime that could crack open a moon. 340 plasma broadsides erupted in overlapping spheres of thermonuclear fire hot enough to vaporize a kilometer of armor plating in a heartbeat. The entire volley converged on a single point in space where the Prometheus's fist hung motionless, unmoving, making no evasive maneuver whatsoever. And for one full second the human ship simply vanished behind a wall of alien firepower so total, so absolute, that on the bridge of the Reclamation's voice several junior officers actually began the traditional Kaelith rites of victory celebration before the smoke had even cleared. Then the smoke cleared. The Prometheus's fist sat exactly where it had been, unmoved, unmarked, wrapped in a faint, shimmering lattice of pale blue light that pulsed once, gently, almost lazily, like a held breath being released, and then faded back to invisibility. "Impact readings," Dross said, and his voice had gone very small. "High Marshal, impact readings show 0, 0 hull penetration, 0 shield degradation, 0. The entire Alpha strike, all 211 graviton lances, all 340 plasma broadsides, registered as fully absorbed with no measurable damage to the target's defensive systems. I have never. There is no record in Dominion history of a single vessel absorbing a full fleet Alpha strike without so much as a shield flicker. High Marshal, this is not possible. This cannot be." "Recalibrate your sensors," Krull snapped, though his four hearts were hammering in a rhythm that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with a fear he had not experienced since he was a hatchling listening to old war stories about the species that broke the Dominion's first reclamation fleet 3 centuries ago. A story every Kaelith child was told, and every Kaelith adult was taught to dismiss as myth. Sensors do not lie, but sensors can be wrong. Fire again. Concentrated fire, all ships, single point of impact, maximum overlap. Now. On the human bridge, Rourke was grinning outright now, the expression of a man watching a bet he'd made 20 years ago finally, gloriously pay off. "Captain, they're spinning up for round 2. "Let them." Voss had returned to her command chair, sitting back down with the easy comfort of someone settling in to watch a show she already knew the ending to. "Tavers, reopen the channel. I want to see the High Marshal's face for this next part." The second volley struck harder, tighter, more concentrated. 50 ships pouring every erg of energy they had into a single overlapping column of destruction, aimed at what Dominion tactical doctrine called the statistical failure point of any shield lattice. the theoretical zone where enough sustained overlapping fire would eventually saturate and collapse even the most advanced defensive systems known to Dominion science. The beam of combined firepower lasted 4 full seconds, 4 seconds that represented more raw destructive output than the Third Reclamation Fleet had expended in its last full planetary bombardment. When it ended, the pale blue shimmer around the Prometheus's fist brightened for exactly one visible pulse, then dimmed again to nothing. "Zero," Dross said, and this time there was no professional composure left in his voice at all, just raw animal disbelief. "High Marshal, 0 damage. 0. I don't, the math doesn't, that is 100% of our combined fleet output, and the shield harmonic didn't even shift phase, it absorbed it like it was nothing, like 50 dreadnoughts firing everything they have is nothing." "Enough." Krull's voice cracked through the bridge like a whip, though the crack in it was not entirely one of authority. He turned back to the viewscreen, to the calm, patient, faintly amused face of Captain Elena Voss, and for the first time in 4 decades of Dominion service, High Marshal Vextarian Krull felt the specific, particular cold that came from realizing, all at once and far too late, that he was not looking at prey. "What," he said slowly, "is that ship?" "I told you," Voss said. 2 decades of preparation, High Marshal. 20 years of studying every weapon in your arsenal and building something specifically designed to no-sell every single one of them. Adaptive shield lattice, keyed to phase shift faster than any weapon signature in your fleet's known combat log. You could fire every gun on every ship you own at this hull for the next hour, and you would accomplish exactly what you've accomplished so far, which is nothing. And I do mean nothing. Not one erg of that energy has done anything but slightly warm up our shield capacitors. Now," she leaned forward, and the amusement in her voice cooled into something harder, something with an edge to it that made Krull's translator drone actually stutter for half a second before rendering the word. "I gave you the chance to see what you were dealing with before this went any further. You saw it. So here is my second and final offer, High Marshal, and I would encourage you to consider it very, very carefully, because I am not going to repeat it. Power down your weapons, hold position, and begin transmitting your fleet's surrender authorization codes. Do that, and every single one of your 50 crews goes home alive today. Every one. I have no interest in slaughtering people who are just following orders from a chain of command that clearly failed to do its homework on the species it decided to threaten." Dross turned to his commander, antennae rigid with something that in a human would have been unmistakable panic. "High Marshal, recommend immediate tactical withdrawal. We should regroup with the—" "Withdrawal," Krull said, and something in his 4 hearts, something old and proud and utterly unwilling to accept the evidence directly in front of his own compound eyes, overrode whatever cold, clear-eyed instinct for survival had briefly surfaced a moment before. "Withdrawal from one ship. One. Single. Vessel. Dross, I have led this fleet through 41 campaigns. I will not radio Dominion High Command that the Third Reclamation Fleet fled a single primitive vessel because its shields proved resilient. There are other tactics. Boarding parties. Disruption torpedoes designed to breach shield lattices through resonance cascade rather than brute force. We will find the weakness, because every shield has one, and when we do, we will make an example of this ship that the rest of this species will remember for the next 1,000 years." He straightened all 4 arms in a gesture of command. "Ring 2 and Ring 3 converge and flank. Deploy disruption torpedoes on my mark. Ring 1, maintain position and continue suppressive fire on the target's projected shield emitters. We adapt, or we die trying, but we do not run." Voss, watching the Dominion formation begin to shift and reposition on her own tactical display, let out a small, almost regretful sigh. "Rurk. Captain, he's going to make us do this the hard way, isn't he? Looks that way. Shame." She stood again, smoothing down the front of her uniform jacket with both hands, and when she spoke next her voice had lost every trace of warmth, replaced by the flat, clipped precision of a woman about to do something she had trained 20 years for and felt not 1 ounce of hesitation about. Weapons, this is Voss. You are cleared for engagement. Disable, don't destroy, unless a vessel presents an active threat to civilian or allied assets, in which case use your judgment. I want this fleet neutralized in under 10 minutes, and I want every single one of those crews alive to go home and tell their children exactly what happened here today. Am I clear? Crystal Captain, said the weapons officer, a lean, quiet man named Chief Petty Officer Idris Malik, who had spent the better part of 2 decades helping design the very weapons systems he was about to use, and who allowed himself, for just a moment, a small, satisfied smile. Bringing primary emitter array online now. Estimated time to first target lock, 4 seconds. Do it. What followed, in the tactical logs later recovered and studied by Dominion strategists across a dozen worlds, would come to be known simply as the Saul demonstration, and it would be taught in Dominion military academies for the next century as the single most catastrophic and humiliating defeat any Dominion fleet had suffered in the 400-year history of Kaelith interstellar conquest. The Prometheus's fist did not maneuver. It did not need to. Its weapon systems, an array of what human engineers had internally, somewhat cheekily, designated lance pattern-directed kinetic emitters, a technology built from 20 years of reverse-engineered Dominion graviton theory, pushed 3 full generations beyond anything the Dominion itself had ever fielded, fired not as broad, overwhelming barrages, but as precise, surgical strikes. Each one calculated in real time by the ship's targeting array to sever exactly the systems needed to render a dreadnought combatant effective, without breaching its hull or endangering its crew. The first strike took the port engine cluster off a Ring 2 cruiser called the Devouring Tide in a single, clean beam of blue-white energy that sheared through 3 meters of Dominion armor as though it were tissue paper. And the ship, suddenly powerless, began a slow, helpless drift away from the formation, its crew screaming into comms channels that nobody on the human ship had any particular interest in listening to just yet. "1," Malik said, calm as a man checking items off a grocery list. The second strike hit a Ring 1 Dreadnought's primary weapon capacitor, overloading it in a brief, contained flash of light that blew every graviton lance mount on the ship's dorsal hull, leaving the vessel intact, its crew alive, but utterly, completely disarmed. 2. On the bridge of the Reclamation's Voice, Krull watched his tactical plot light up with disabled status icons at a rate that defied every principle of engagement he had spent 4 decades internalizing. "That is not possible," he said, to nobody, to himself, to the ghosts of 41 dead civilizations who had presumably said some version of the same thing in their final moments. "No targeting computer resolves that fast. No weapon cycles that quickly. Dross, report now. What is happening to my fleet?" "High Marshal, we're being systematically disarmed, ship by ship. They're not even trying to destroy us. They're surgically removing our capacity to fight, engine clusters, weapon mounts, shield generators, 1 hit per system. Every hit lands exactly where it needs to and nowhere else. I have never seen targeting precision like this. No Dominion fleet has ever." Ring 2 attempted the maneuver its captains had drilled 1,000 times against lesser enemies. A rolling pincer designed to force a single target to divide its defensive attention across 2 axes simultaneously. 5 cruisers peeling away to starboard in a long, curving burn, while their 5 sister ships held the original line. The classic Dominion double envelopment that had broken the will of species who had never once had to think about what it meant to be attacked from 2 directions at once. The Prometheus's fist did not divide its attention. It did not need to. Malik's targeting array registered both wings of the pincer as a single unified firing solution, and answered with 2 beams fired in such close succession that the ship's own sensor logs would later show a gap of only 11 milliseconds between them, 1 lance opening a clean, cauterized wound through the engine trunk of the cruiser's silent reckoning on the starboard wing, the other severing the drive coupling of the cruiser Ashfall Herald on the port line. And both vessels went dark and drifting within the same half-second, their pincer maneuver stillborn before either wing had even completed its turn. "4," Malik said, and allowed himself, for the first time, a small note of genuine professional appreciation. "Their formation discipline is actually solid, Captain. Shame the tactic doesn't account for an enemy that can process 2 firing solutions faster than their own crews can finish issuing the order to execute it." "Noted for the after-action report," Voss said, eyes still fixed on the plot. "Don't get complacent. Precision matters more than speed right now. I want every single one of those crews walking off their ships when this is over, not carried off." "Copy that, Captain. Systems only, threading the needle on every shot." Malik's hands moved across his console with the unhurried, practiced rhythm of a man performing a task he had rehearsed in simulation more times than he could count. And the strikes continued, each one a small, contained act of violence aimed with such exacting precision that Dominion damage control officers across the fleet began reporting, with increasing disbelief, that not a single crew compartment had suffered so much as a hull breach. "Ring 3, converge on the target immediately, full boarding assault. If we cannot outshoot it, we will outcrew it. Prepare marine contingents for." "High Marshal, Ring 3 has already lost maneuvering capability on 6 of 10 vessels. We cannot converge, we cannot maneuver. Half the fleet is already." A Ring 3 battlecruiser called the Talon of Vashik broke from its assigned formation entirely, its captain apparently deciding that the only viable response to an enemy this far beyond doctrine was to abandon doctrine altogether, angling hard toward the human ship's flank in a desperate attempt to bring its remaining broadside batteries to bear at point-blank range where, in theory, raw proximity might overwhelm even an adaptive shield lattice. Voss watched the maneuver develop on her plot with something almost like sympathy. "Bold," she murmured, watching the battlecruiser's engine flare brighten as it committed fully to the run, its captain evidently betting everything on a single decisive gamble rather than the slow, grinding attrition the rest of the fleet seemed resigned to. "Wrong, but bold. Malik, that one's showing initiative. Give the crew the courtesy of a clean shutdown rather than a strip-down, engine only. Let them keep their guns so their pride's a little less bruised when this is over." "Copy, Captain. Engine only." A single beam, precisely calibrated, took the Talon of Vashik's entire propulsion section offline in one silent pulse of light, and the battlecruiser slewed to a dead stop half a kilometer short of its intended firing range, weapons intact, useless, its captain presumably now staring at a tactical plot that made no sense to him whatsoever. 12, Malik reported. Krull's 4 hearts hammered against each other in a rhythm his physicians would later describe, with clinical understatement, as consistent with acute combat stress. He turned to Dross, his composure fraying at the edges for the first time in the engagement. "Deploy the disruption torpedoes. Now, full spread, every remaining launch tube, resonance cascade warheads. If their shield lattice has any harmonic vulnerability at all, we will find it through saturation if nothing else works." "Deploying now, High Marshal." Dross's antennae trembled visibly even through the sensor feed. "Torpedoes away." 41 warheads inbound on the target. On the human bridge, Tavers's voice carried a fresh note of tension for the first time since the engagement began. "Captain, multiple torpedo launches, 41 inbound. These aren't the same weapon signature as the earlier barrage. Sensors flagging them as resonance cascade warheads, designed to disrupt shield harmonics rather than punch through armor directly." Finally, something with an actual brain behind it. Voss allowed herself a small, approving nod even as she issued the order. "Point defense grid, intercept pattern Delta 7, take them out before harmonic contact. I don't want to find out the hard way whether our lattice actually has a resonance weakness, and neither does anyone on that fleet need to watch us test it in real time." The Prometheus's fist's point defense grid, an array of close-in interceptor emitters humming along the length of the massive hull, answered in a silent, staccato flicker of light. 41 brief detonations blooming and fading against the black in the space of under 2 seconds. Every single warhead intercepted well outside the ship's shield perimeter, close enough for the crew to feel the faint tremor of the shockwaves through the deck plating, and no closer. Torpedoes neutralized, zero harmonic contact achieved, Tavers reported, something almost like relief in her voice despite herself. That was actually a solid tactic, Captain. If even a few of those had connected, we might have seen a real test of the lattice's resonance tolerance. Duly noted, and I'll make sure High Marshal Krull knows his tactical officer earned that compliment. Voss's tone didn't shift, calm and level even as the engagement stretched past the 4-minute mark. Malik, status. 26 disabled, Captain. Fleet cohesion is essentially gone at this point. Most remaining ships are either attempting independent evasive maneuvers or holding position waiting for orders that aren't coming fast enough to matter. A pair of Ring 5 escort frigates, smaller and faster than the dreadnoughts around them, broke low and fast beneath the human ship's ventral hull in a coordinated strafing run, their captains apparently gambling that speed and a minimal profile might slip a shot through some gap in the shield lattice that brute force volleys had failed to find. Voss watched the maneuver develop with an expression of mild, almost academic interest. Now that's a genuinely clever idea, she admitted, half to Rourke, half to herself. Wrong ship to try it on, but clever. Malik, can the point defense grid handle those two without pulling resources from the main array? Easily, Captain. They're fast, but they're not that fast. 2 brief, precise pulses from the ship's secondary emitter banks caught both frigates mid-run, clipping their maneuvering thrusters just enough to send them tumbling gently out of formation, intact, crude, harmless. 28. On the Dominion bridge, Dross had abandoned any pretense of a formal damage report, his voice reduced to a running, disbelieving commentary as icon after icon on the tactical plot shifted from active to disabled. High Marshal, I am formally recommending immediate and total withdrawal. We have no remaining tactical option that has not already failed. Continued engagement serves no purpose beyond additional losses we cannot afford and, evidently, cannot inflict in return. Krull stood very still at the center of his bridge, watching the last vestiges of a doctrine he had built his entire career around dissolve in real time. And for a long moment he said nothing at all, caught in the particular paralysis of a man watching the floor disappear beneath him, one tile at a time, weighing 4 decades of pride against the plain, undeniable arithmetic scrolling across his own tactical display. Aboard the Prometheus's fist, Voss watched the tactical plot with the calm, focused attention of a surgeon, rather than a warrior, occasionally issuing quiet, precise instructions that Malik and his weapons team translated into strike after surgical strike. Talk to me, Rourke. 19 ships disabled, 0 casualties reported on either side, Captain. Their formations completely broken. They're not even attempting coordinated tactics anymore. Half their captains are just trying to run, and the other half are still following Krull's orders to converge, which is, frankly, making our job easier, since a converging target is an easier target. Keep the channel open to Krull. I want him watching every second of this. Voss's eyes never left the plot. Malik, how's the crew holding up? No injuries, Captain. No fatalities, not even close. We're pulling maybe 4% output on the primary emitter array. This is well within tolerance. Malik fired again, and a Ring 2 Dreadnought's shield generator blew out in a shower of harmless violet sparks visible even from a distance, the ship drifting dark and defenseless into the debris field of its disabled sister vessels. 22. On the Dominion flagship, Dross had stopped even trying to maintain professional composure. High Marshal, 31 ships disabled, 31 in under 6 minutes. They have not fired a single shot that has killed a single Kaelith. They are dismantling this fleet like a technician stripping components off obsolete hardware. This is not a battle, High Marshal. I don't even know what to call what this is. A demonstration, Krull said, very quietly, and something in the way he said it made even Dross fall silent. The High Marshal stood at the center of his bridge, watching 41 years of conquest and certainty collapse in real time around a single ship that had not even bothered to raise its shields to full harmonic capacity. And for the first time since he was a hatchling, Vextarian Krull understood, with the total, bone-deep clarity of a species finally meeting something larger than itself, exactly what it felt like to be the primitive one in the room. "All ships," he said into the fleet-wide channel, his voice carrying none of its earlier bombast, none of its practiced menace, just flat, exhausted resignation. "All ships cease fire immediately. Power down weapon systems and hold position." He turned to the main view screen to Captain Voss, who watched him with an expression that held no triumph in it at all, only a kind of tired, patient expectation, the look of a teacher waiting for a slow student to finally arrive at the obvious answer. "Captain Voss." "High Marshal, you have made your point." The words seemed to cost him something physical to say, 4 decades of pride collapsing into the admission. 31 of my ships are disabled. My fleet cannot fight, cannot flee, and by your own admission you have deliberately spared every crew aboard them. I ask you honestly, and I ask it as a commander who has never once in his career had to ask an enemy this question. What do you want? Voss walked back to the center of her bridge and looked directly into the camera, and when she spoke, her voice had softened just slightly, the voice not of a conqueror savoring a victory but of someone laying out simple, unavoidable terms. "I want exactly what I told you an hour ago, High Marshal. Power down the remaining 19 ships, transmit surrender authorization, and every single Kaelith in this fleet, all 50 crews, goes home, alive, unharmed. I have no interest in your ships. I have no interest in your territory. I don't even particularly want an apology, though I imagine one might be appropriate given the circumstances. What I want is for you to go back to whoever sits above you in the Dominion command structure and deliver a message, word for word, exactly as I give it to you." "And what message is that?" Krull's 4 arms had gone slack at his sides, the posture of a man too tired, too shocked, to hold himself upright with the old authority anymore. "Tell them Earth is not on the list of species you can walk into a system and demand surrender from anymore. Tell them we don't want your territory, we don't want a war, and we have absolutely no interest in becoming the 42nd name in your conquest ledger. But tell them also, High Marshal, very clearly, so there's no confusion later, that we have spent 20 years building exactly one ship like this one, and it took roughly 6 minutes to disable an entire fleet of 50 Dominion Dreadnoughts without a single fatality on either side. Then let them sit with the question of what happens the day we decide to build a second one." The silence on the Dominion bridge stretched long enough that Ensign Tavers actually checked to make sure the channel hadn't dropped. Before Krull could answer, Dross's voice cut across the bridge again, tight with a fresh wave of alarm. "High Marshal, Ring 4 Commander Vesic is refusing the stand-down order. He's requesting permission to break formation and attempt an independent ramming vector, says his ship still has sublight propulsion, and he'd rather die attempting a strike than watch the fleet surrender without firing another shot." Krull closed his eyes for a moment, the particular exhaustion of a commander who had spent his whole career rewarding exactly that kind of reckless valor now finding it, for the first time, to be a liability rather than a virtue. Patch him through. The image split, a second Kaelith face appearing alongside Krull's, younger, mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation, his voice raw. "High Marshal, I still have sublight drive. I still have forward plasma capacitors at 30% charge. Give the order and I will put the Bloodclaw's reach directly into that human hull, whatever their shields can absorb from a fleet volley. They cannot absorb a 900,000-ton ship traveling at ramming velocity. Let me." "Belay that." Voss's voice cut in on the shared channel before Krull could even respond, calm, almost gentle, the tone of someone talking a frightened animal down from a ledge rather than a battlefield opponent. Commander Vesic, is it? I'd like you to look at your own tactical plot before you commit to that maneuver. Look at your acceleration curve. Look at ours. There was a pause and then a very different sound from Vesic's side of the channel, a low, strangled note of dawning horror. That is not possible. Your ship altered its relative position by 400 kilometers with no visible drive flare. You didn't move. You couldn't have moved. There's no thrust signature. Inertial dampening field, Commander, paired with a reactionless drive array your sensors genuinely aren't built to detect yet. I let it register a beat late so you'd have the chance to reconsider before I had to actually stop you the hard way. Please don't make me stop you the hard way. I already told your High Marshal I want everyone going home today, and I meant everyone, including the hot-headed one. A brief pause, and something almost like warmth crept into her voice. You've got a war record, Vesic. I can see it on the Open Dominion registry your own fleet is broadcasting. 30 years of service, 3 commendations, 1 daughter waiting for you back on your homeworld according to your ship's public crew manifest. Don't turn today into the day she stops waiting. The silence that followed lasted nearly 10 full seconds. Then, quietly, almost brokenly, belaying ramming vector High Marshal, powering down weapons. A pause. Apologies for the outburst. None needed, Commander, Krull said, and something in the exchange seemed to settle something in him too, a decision crystallizing behind his crimson eyes. Stand by for withdrawal orders. He looked back to the main screen, to Voss, and inclined his head very slightly, an unfamiliar gesture performed with visible effort. You could have disabled his ship the moment he issued that order. You had every justification. Instead, you talked him down like he was a child throwing a tantrum rather than an enemy combatant. He wasn't an enemy combatant, High Marshal. He was a scared man about to make the kind of decision people make when they've just watched everything they believed about their own strength get taken apart in 6 minutes. I'd have done the same thing at his age, honestly, in his position. Doesn't mean I was going to let him die for it. Voss folded her arms. That's the other thing you might want to mention in your report if you don't mind. We don't just have better shields. We spent 20 years thinking about exactly this moment, about what it would take to win without leaving corpses behind to breed the next war. Anyone can build a bigger gun, High Marshal. Building the restraint to use it exactly once, exactly enough and no more, that's the part that actually took us 2 decades. Understood, Captain Voss, Krull said finally, and something had changed in his voice. The last vestiges of arrogance burned away and replaced by something that, for a Kaelith commander who had conquered 41 worlds, was almost unbearably difficult to voice. Transmitting surrender authorization for the remaining 19 vessels now. You will find no further resistance from this fleet. He paused. Captain, a question, if I may, one commander to another before this transmission ends. Go ahead. 41 species, 41 worlds over 4 centuries of Dominion expansion, and every single one of them believed in their final hour that they were unique, that they alone would find some way to resist what always proved inevitable. I ask you honestly, are you certain you are different? Or will some other fleet, centuries from now, receive the same order to reclaim Saul, and find that your one great ship has grown old, and your species has grown complacent, and the story of today has become nothing more than a legend nobody quite believes anymore? Voss considered the question for a long moment, and when she answered, there was no bravado in it at all, only the quiet certainty of someone who had genuinely thought it through. Maybe, High Marshal, species change. Complacency happens to everyone eventually, yours included, I'd wager, somewhere down the line. But I'll tell you what makes today different from your other 41 conquests, and it's not the ship, and it's not the shields, and it's not the weapons. She glanced, just briefly, at Rourke, at Malik, at Tavers, at the 40 men and women on her bridge who had spent 2 decades of their lives preparing for exactly this morning. It's that every other species you conquered met you for the first time on the day you arrived to conquer them. We didn't. We've known you were coming for 20 years, High Marshal. We watched you take the OSC Collective apart piece by piece, and we didn't get angry. We didn't panic. We got to work. So maybe someday humanity gets complacent. Maybe someday we forget. But species that have already been afraid once, that have already looked at exactly what's coming for them and built something specifically to survive it, tend to remember that lesson for a very long time. I'd encourage the Dominion to remember today just as well as we will. Krull said nothing for a long moment. Then, slowly, with the stiff formality of a species that had never once in 400 years performed this particular gesture toward an enemy who was not fully conquered, he inclined all four arms in what human xenolinguistic analysts would later confirm was the closest thing the Kaelith Dominion had to a gesture of respect. Then I will carry your message myself, Captain Voss, and I will carry it honestly, because I have led fleets across this galaxy for 4 decades, and I have never, not once, seen anything like what your single ship did to mine today. He turned from the camera, addressing his own bridge crew one final time, his voice carrying the weight of a man closing a chapter he had never expected to close this way. Dross, signal all vessels. We are withdrawing from the Sol system. Full retreat, minimum safe warp distance, rendezvous at the threshold gate. He looked back to the screen one last time. Captain Voss, for whatever it is worth from one commander to another, well fought. Safe travels, High Marshal, Voss said, and there was no mockery in it, only the simple, exhausted courtesy of a woman who had just spent 6 minutes proving something to an entire galaxy and felt no particular need to gloat about it now that it was done. Try not to come back with anything bigger. I'd hate for this to become a habit. The channel closed. On the tactical plot, the 19 remaining Dominion Dreadnoughts, along with the 31 drifting, disabled hulks of their sister ships, began the slow, humiliated process of powering up warp drives and departing the system that, until 6 minutes ago, they had arrived at fully intending to conquer. The bridge of the S. Prometheus's fist erupted into the kind of restrained, disciplined cheering that only a genuinely professional crew could manage. Handshakes and shoulder claps rippling across the room, Malik leaning back in his chair with the deep, satisfied exhale of a man who had just watched 2 decades of his life's work perform flawlessly on its very first day of live combat. Rourke turned to Voss with a grin splitting his gray beard nearly in half. Captain, for the record, that was, without exaggeration, the single greatest thing I have ever watched happen on any bridge I've ever served on. Log it as a successful first engagement, Commander, nothing more. But Voss allowed herself, finally, a real smile, small and tired and genuine, as she sank back into her command chair and let the tension of the last hour drain slowly out of her shoulders. Tavers, get me a channel to Earth Defense Command. They're going to want the full sensor logs, and I imagine somebody in the Pentagon owes somebody in Geneva a truly enormous amount of money on a bet I am choosing not to know the details of. Already compiling the transmission, Captain, Tavers said, still grinning despite herself. Should I include the High Marshal's parting comment in the official report, the well-fought one? Include all of it, Voss said, watching the last shimmer of Dominion warp signatures fade from her tactical display. The system finally, quietly, returning to the ordinary hum of an unremarkable morning in an unremarkable solar system that had, in the space of 1 hour, permanently and irrevocably changed its place in the galaxy. Every word. Something tells me people are going to want to hear exactly how this one went, and I'd rather they hear it accurately the first time than get the story wrong 100 years from now. Outside the viewport, Earth turned on, blue and quiet and entirely unaware, for now, of just how close its people had come to a very different kind of morning, and just how thoroughly, in the space of 6 extraordinary minutes, that possibility had been put to rest. The retreating fleet limped back through the threshold gate in a formation that bore no resemblance to the crisp, geometric pride with which it had arrived. 31 dreadnoughts under tow or drifting on backup thrusters, 19 more running escort at reduced speed, every single ship carrying a crew that had, within the space of a single morning, been forced to reckon with the collapse of an assumption 400 years in the making. Word of the Sol demonstration reached Dominion High Command 11 days later, carried across 3 relay stations by a shaken, humiliated High Marshal who delivered his report in person rather than trust it to any transmission. Because some things, he had decided somewhere in the long, silent warp transit home, needed to be said to a superior's face if they were going to be believed at all. The Dominion War Council listened to his account in total C. Lentz watched the sensor logs twice, and then sat for a long while in a stillness that 400 years of unbroken conquest had never once required of them before. Counselor Rithik Vaughn, eldest of the sitting War Council, and the officer who had personally overseen the conquest of the Osk Collective decades earlier, was the first to break the silence, and what he said would be repeated in whispers across every Dominion shipyard within the month. 41 worlds, Vaughn said slowly, his 4 eyes fixed not on Krull but on the frozen tactical display still hovering above the council table, the image of a single dark hull sitting motionless at the center of a broken formation. 41 worlds, and in every single case, we told ourselves the same comfortable lie. That conquest was simply what happened when a mature species encountered an immature one, that it was less a crime than a law of nature, as inevitable as gravity. High Marshal Krull has just shown this council that we were never the mature species in that equation at all. We were merely the ones who had not yet met someone larger. With respect, Counselor, said another voice from further down the table, sharper, more defensive. One anomalous vessel does not overturn 4 centuries of doctrine. Perhaps this Captain Voss commands the only ship of her kind. Perhaps humanity spent everything they had on a single grand gesture and has nothing behind it. Perhaps, Krull said quietly, and every head at the table turned toward him, because in 11 days of travel he had said remarkably little, and the council had begun to wonder whether the humiliation of the engagement had simply broken something in him that would never quite mend. Or perhaps, Counselor, you did not listen closely enough to her final words to me. She did not threaten a second ship as a bluff. She stated it as a certainty, the way one states the weather or the tide. I have led this fleet against 41 species, and I have learned to recognize the particular tone of an enemy who is lying to preserve themselves. Captain Voss was not lying. She did not need to. Across 41 conquered worlds, in bars and mess halls and listening posts scattered along the edges of Dominion space, word spread the way it always spreads among people who have spent their whole lives being told there is no alternative to submission, quietly at first, then louder, then in 100 different languages, all repeating some version of the same impossible sentence. There is a species out past the threshold gate that fought 50 dreadnoughts with 1 ship, and won without killing anyone, and told the Dominion no. On the Varathi homeworld, where Dominion occupation forces had governed for over a century, the story reached the underground resistance networks within a season, whispered first as rumor, then copied hand to hand on physical media, because the Dominion had long ago learned to monitor every digital channel. A single sentence scratched onto cave walls and shipping containers and the undersides of market stalls across a dozen cities. They said no, and they were right too. On Earth, the aftermath unfolded with considerably less mythology and considerably more paperwork. Captain Voss spent the 6 hours following the Dominion fleet's withdrawal fielding an unbroken sequence of transmissions from Earth Defense Command, the United Nations Security Council, and with some bemusement, several heads of state who had apparently decided that direct contact with the captain of humanity's sole super dreadnought was worth interrupting their own schedules for. She answered each of them with the same patient, unhurried honesty she had shown the Dominion fleet, walking generals and diplomats alike through sensor logs, damage assessments, and the full, unedited transcript of her exchange with High Marshal Krull, insisting, over the objections of at least two officials who would have preferred a more triumphant framing, that the full record include her own uncertainty in the moments before contact, her crew's names, and an unambiguous statement that the goal of the engagement had never been humiliation for its own sake. "People are going to want to turn this into a legend," she told Rourke privately, much later that evening, as the adrenaline of the day finally began to drain out of both of them in the quiet of her ready room, 2 cups of coffee gone cold on the desk between them. Bigger ship, bigger guns, apex predator of the galaxy, all of that. And maybe some of it's even true, but I'd rather people remember what actually happened up there. Nobody died today, Rourke. 50 ships, thousands of Kaelith crew, and not one of them went home in a body bag because we spent 20 years building something that didn't need to kill to win. That's the part I want them teaching in schools 100 years from now, not the parts that make for a better highlight reel. Rourke turned his cooling coffee mug slowly between his hands, considering that for a long moment. "For what it's worth, Captain, I think both versions get told. The legend and the truth aren't always the same story, but sometimes they end up pointing the same direction anyway." Nobody in the Dominion sent another reclamation fleet towards Sol for a very long time. The third reclamation fleet was formally decommissioned within the year, its surviving ships redistributed to garrison duty across quieter sectors, and High Marshal Vextarian Krull, rather than facing the disgrace many had expected, was quietly reassigned to a newly created Dominion office with a title that translated, roughly and without much elegance, into something like Bureau of Unprecedented Contingencies, a posting whose sole function, as far as anyone outside the War Council could determine, was to prepare contingency doctrine for the possibility that humanity was not, in fact, a singular anomaly, but the leading edge of something the Dominion had never once had to plan for in 400 years of expansion, an enemy that might actually be stronger than it was. And in the quiet, well-guarded shipyards of a small, unremarkable planet at the edge of a small, unremarkable system, humanity got back to work, because Voss had been right about one thing above all else. Species that have already been afraid once tend to remember the lesson for a very long time, and they very rarely stop at building just one.